Good morning. Just want to mention that I do intend, Im Yetz Hashem, to continue with the practical topic of using hot water and showering on Yom Tif. It does take many hours to prepare those classes, and I wasn't ready to do that topic today. Hopefully, in one of the next coming weeks, I'll be able to return and get some more clarity about that topic. So the topic for today is the bracha of Tefilas Haderech. In this week's parsha, Parshas Pa'aloscha in Chutz La'aretz, we read Vayihi ben Soya ha'orin v'yomer Moshe, that when the Jewish people would travel, when the Aron was lifted, and that was the beginning of their travels, Kuma Hashem, Moshe said, Kuma Hashem v'yafutz oivecha v'yanusu mesanecha mipanecha, that your enemies should be dispersed and run away from in front of you. And in the commentary of Rabbi Yosef Bechor Shoir, one of the Baalei HaTosfos, on this pasuk, he says, "Zu hi Tefilas Haderech shelhem." This was the Tefilas Haderech of the Jewish people in the desert. That when they were traveling from one place to the other in the desert, they said this prayer that Moshe Rabbeinu said on behalf of the Jewish people, "Kuma Hashem v'yafutz oivecha v'yanusu mesanecha mipanecha." This was the Tefilas Haderech. The concept of davening when one travels goes back very early. We find already Yaakov Avinu in Parshas Vayetze, where he goes on his travels, and he says, if Hashem is going to guard me on this journey that I am traveling on. There are other psukim that also allude to this. There's in Sefer Ezra. There's also in Sefer Ezra in chapter 8. There's also this idea of levakish meno derech yishara lanu letapenu, the idea of saying a bracha, a prayer for travel, and this is codified in the Gemara in Brachas, that when a person goes on a journey, he has to say Tefilas Haderech.
What do they consider a journey?
Oh, what's considered a journey? We're going to get to all these things,
okay.
But now. So Tefilas Haderech, the way the Gemara presents it and the way the Pasuk presents it, is not just a nice idea that you could do, but it's actually an obligation that, just like Chazal v'Kivea, Chazal established brachas for all sorts of things. You have a bracha when you eat and a bracha when you hear thunder, right? So there's a bracha when you go on a journey, and you're supposed to say this bracha when you go on a journey. And it seems like there were different times when people or communities were neglecting, not taking this seriously enough, and often you find in the poskim like these ideas, I have to make sure to remind people to say it, and later we'll talk more about what we have from Chabad, specifically about Tefilas Haderech, but I saw there's a number of different, when people wrote to the Rebbe about they were traveling, whatever it was, the Rabbi sometimes reminded people about saying Tefilas Haderech. Specifically, one was from 91, and I mentioned the year, it's important, but we'll get to that later. But in 1991, the Rabbi wrote to Rabbi Menachem Garolitzky, who was traveling to Montreal. The Rabbi wrote to him, there are many of Anash who, and then in quote, who quote-unquote don't have the minhag, ein nohagim b'Tefilas Haderech. So in other words, people, it seems like the Rebbe is sort of saying, people treat this as sort of a minhag, which is not that important, or whatever it is. Basically, if people use the opportunity to remind people that Tefilas Haderech is indeed an important thing to do. Okay, so we're familiar with, I think everybody's familiar with Tefilas Haderech. It's in the Siddur, people say it, there's different nuschos, there's Chabad nusach, other nuschos. Now, the first question is, cover a few things of Tefilas Haderech, practically speaking. Firstly, the Gemara says, over there in Brachas, that a person should include himself with the public. Which means, says Rashi, that you should say Tefilas Haderech in a public, in plural. Not that you should that I should go on a peaceful journey, but that we should go on a peaceful journey. Now, in this Gemara, there's two ways to understand it. One way to understand it, and you might see the more obvious way to understand it, is that if you are traveling with other people, then you should say it in the plural. But if you're traveling alone, why should you say it in the plural? You're going yourself. What are you talking about, right? So that's in fact the way the Orchos Chaim and some Rishonim understand it. However, other Rishonim understand it to be a general thing, that even if you're traveling alone, you should always include yourself with the public so that you say it in the plural, and you're including, obviously, at any given time, you're not the only person traveling. You might be traveling on this specific trip alone, but there are other people also traveling to their destinations and their trips. And therefore, it's always a good idea to include yourself, not to say a personal prayer, but to say a public prayer. You include yourself in the congregation, so therefore you should always say Tefilas Haderech in the public, and this in the plural, and this is indeed certainly the way it is a Chabad. I believe, generally speaking, that's the consensus, that you always say Tefilas Haderech in the plural tense.
It seems obvious if you have fellow travelers that you should say Shalom Shalom.
Why is that obvious? I mean, it's obvious because that's what the Gemara says Lashon Rambam, but without
I would say it's so obvious that I don't even feel like the
Why? If everybody's saying their own Tefilas Haderech,
who says they will?
What?
Who says they will? Here I am, I'm with the people, I make sure to include them.
Well, you could do that, or each person could say their own bracha.
That's a big if.
Well, it depends on the circumstances. Either it is or it isn't.
I'm not with a group of people.
But why is it a big if? There's never. You say, we're all going to say Tefilah. We'll talk soon about stopping, but we're all going to stop now. We're going to say Tefilas Haderech. So everybody says it. So why should you include them?
When we say all brachas are always, a lot of times, I shouldn't say always, but many times the brachas are in plural.
Yeah.
When you're saying like Shemona Esrei
is in plural, yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying that the fact that it has to be in plural is not something. Yeah, and the Paskim say that if b'diavad you said it b'lashon yachid yoytze, it's not. But even if you're traveling with other people, I mean, it makes sense to say it in the plural. But I don't know if it's a logical imperative that you must say it in the plural. If the Gemara,
I'm saying, but if everyone might be at risk, it just makes sense. I understand what you're saying. Just like Kriya Shema, we're all going to say. I'm not saying it for everybody. We're all going to say our own Kriya Shema.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about a matter of safety, if you're traveling with a group of people, you want to make
I
sure.
mean, in general, we say Tefilas b'lashon Rabbi. Not Yosef mentioned the Amida. All things, yeah. The same b'libeinu bina lahavin lahaskin. Yeah, we talk always in the plural.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, there is a very old Kabbalah sefer called the Sefer HaKana. I'm not sure. I think generally speaking, it's attributed to Reb Nechunya ben Hakana, who was one of the Tanoim. I don't know exactly if that attribution is 100% accepted or if there's other attributions, but it's certainly a very old Kabbalah sefer. And he says that the reason you say Tefilas Haderech in the plural is not because there's other travelers, but because you are talking about yourself in the plural, because you're not just yourself, you have the malachim, every person has malachim who accompany him wherever he goes. Interesting to note that this is also another related halacha to the malachim who accompany with you, is a halacha that's brought in the Gemara, it's brought in the Rambam, it's brought in Shulchan Aruch, even though practically speaking we don't say it so much. I don't know anyone who says it, but it is out there, and that before a person goes into the bathroom, there's a special sort of declaration you say to the malachim accompanying you, saying like, excuse me, this is what I got to do right now. So there's this idea again, even in the Rambam, that there's malachim who are accompanying you. Now it's a whole discussion to understand exactly what the Rambam's conception of malachim are. It's a whole big topic. We're not going into that now, but there's the idea that malachim going with you. And says in Sefer HaKana, that's why you say Tefilas Haderech in the plural. However, now there's a practical difference between the two reasons to say Tefilas Haderech in the plural, because in Sefer HaKana continues that there's a word over there, Usneini lecheinu lechesed l'rachamim, that I should, or in the Chabad Nusach there's a double tav, Sitneini, whatever the grammar of that is, but basically it means that you should place me in a favorable position. I should find favor and kindness in people's eyes. In your eyes, Hashem, and in the eyes of all those who see us, I should find favor. Now, finding favor is a human characteristic that doesn't apply to malachim, and therefore says Sefer HaKana that specific word of Tefilas Haderech should be said in the singular form. Now, so how do we paskin on Isis? It's interesting that the Magen Avraham paskins like the Sefer HaKana, that you should say in the singular, and indeed this is certainly the Chabad minhag. Actually he brings here that in the Alter Rebbe Siddur originally it says it's Neinu in the plural, but later on the Tzemach Tzedek edited it that obviously it's in accordance with the Magen Avraham that it should be V'sitnei Ni. And the interesting thing is that certainly in Chabad we say V'sitnei Ni we say the whole thing in the plural besides the word V'sitnei Ni L'chein L'chesed in the singular, even if you're traveling with a group. Even if you're traveling in a group, we say the whole thing in the plural, and that word we say in the singular. So it seems like we're accepting the ruling of the Sefer HaKana and the Magen Avraham exclusively. What's the Minhag Ashkenaz? How do you know? How do you say? You say Teinu v'Sitnei Ni.
No.
You say Teinu. Whether you're traveling alone or the group makes no difference. You're always saying the whole thing in the plural. Okay, so it's interesting. I didn't see what the Mishnah Berurah says, but certainly the Magen Avraham says that you should say v'Sitnei Ni in the singular. Now, okay, moving on. There is the Gemara continues over there. How do you say Tefilas Haderech? If Chisda says you should say it Mu'umad. Now, Mu'umad usually means standing. Let's just use, Mu'umad mean, okay, so there's two things that Amida could mean. Amida can mean standing as opposed to sitting, and Amida can also mean stationary as opposed to traveling, as opposed to moving. So let's start with the second interpretation. Mu'umad means stationary. So if Chisda says you say the bracha stationary,
Right here.
Can't see. Interesting. Okay. Rav Sheshes says no, you don't need to say it stationary. You could say it even while you are mahalach. Literally means walking. Rav Sheshes were walking on the way, were traveling. Come Rav Chisda stop. I think come in this context means he stopped and he was davening. It seems like he was davening Tefilas Haderech. Rav Sheshes said to his assistant, what's Rav Chisda doing? He's davening. Was Rav Sheshes blind? I don't remember. Could be. Anyway, Rav Sheshes says to his assistant, okay, let's also stop and I'll say Tefilas Haderech as well. Is a lashon of a pasuk, which means basically just because A is okay doesn't mean that B is not better. So even though Rav Sheshes himself held that it was legitimate to say Tefilas Haderech while he was continuing on his travels, he agreed that it was better to say Tefilas Haderech stationary, and therefore, since Rav Chisda was anyway stopping to do it, so he also said Tefilas Haderech stationary. So
Rav Sheshes and Rav Chisda, were they Amoraim or Tanaim?
Amoraim. There is no, I don't think there's any, there is reference to Tefilas Haderech in the Mishnah, but that's in Parakoroya. Okay, that's different. Tefilas Haderech, there's two types of Tefilas Haderech, which Lamaisa we merge them both. There's one for traveling and one for leaving a city, which could be dangerous if you survive the city, whatever. I don't think we're going to have time to get into that. But certainly the elaboration of the laws of Tefilas Haderech come from the Gemara, not from the Mishnah. Okay, so Lamaisa, how do we paskin? So the Rishonim say that everybody agrees that this is sort of it's a legitimate, it's allowed to say Tefilas Haderech while you're still walking. But if it's possible, it's a good thing to stop to say Tefilas Haderech. And for all the poskim bring this, I'll read you the language of the Alter Rebbe. Strictly speaking, you could say Tefilas Haderech even while you are traveling or walking. It's better to stop, to stand still while you're saying Tefilas Haderech. If it's possible. If the rest of your caravan, if the rest of your group are also stopping, so then you stop and you say Tefilas Haderech. But if you're going to stop, say Tefilas Haderech, and then you're going to have to catch up to everybody, then that's not a good idea. And in that case, you say Tefilas Haderech while you are walking. You don't. Nevertheless, as Alter Rebbe, we just mean you should stop from walking. If you're riding on an animal, you don't have to get off the animal. You're going horseback riding. You're going from town to town, so you stop the horse and you say Tefilas Haderech while the horse is stationary. You don't have to get off from the animal. Listen to this. The same is true. So somebody who is sitting in a wagon, you don't have to get off the wagon. If it's possible, you should stop the horses, and if not, then you say it while the horses are still riding. Now, The question is, does this idea? Let's say practically speaking, you're driving. So if you can pull, obviously it has to be in a safe way, right? So if you can pull over into a gas station or something and say Tefilas Haderech stationary, that's certainly better. But if not, it's okay to say it while you're driving. Now the question is, does this apply to everybody in the vehicle or only to the driver? Meaning, what if you're, I don't know, let's say you're going on a bus, right? So, okay, we'll see later that there's a specific period within their journey that it's best to say Tefilas Haderech. But let's just say, given all, if all is equal, is there a preference that you should wait till the bus stops to say Tefilas Haderech? Or is the idea only if you're driving or you're, whatever the old, you're leading the wagon, right? You're whipping the horse. So then you're distracted. So then you should say then it's best to stop. But if you're just sitting on the bus or on the train or on the so is it better to wait until it stops or not? That seems to be unclear. There could be perhaps the yukim in both ways. There are certainly achronim who say that it does not apply to the people who are just passive passengers because they're not distracted by the fact that the car is moving versus the guy who's actually driving. He's hopefully concentrating on the way. So even though it's not I could know from personal experience. You're not sort of major concentration. You're driving. It's relaxed, whatever it is. But to say Tefilas Haderech is somewhat. It's difficult to concentrate properly for me, at least while I'm driving. Often while I'm driving, I'll prefer somebody else's Tefilas Haderech, and I listen and say Amen, which is also an option, just like Kiddush and everything. You could be Yotze from somebody else as long as you listen and you say Amen.
Before I go, do I say Tefilas Haderech or do I have to do it?
Oh, we're gonna go there. Okay, so that's as far as going stationary is concerned. Now we come to the other interpretation of the word Amida. What about actually standing up? Okay, so we've said that ideally you should stop your car, What about once you stop? Do you just sit there, you pull over, and you sit and say, or you should get out the car and stand up to say it? So there's actually an interesting interpretation on the Gemara that we spoke before about Rav Sheshes. That he says that the reason why Rav Sheshes holds that it's okay to say Tefilas Haderech while you're still traveling is because we're not gonna, you're traveling, we don't want to slow you down to have to say Tefilas Haderech. But if you're sitting, and so you're sitting anyway, it's not gonna. In other words, once you're anyway stopped, or in a case where you don't have to stop, like you're sitting on a wagon or in a car. So just stand up. Okay, we think of a car, you can't really stand in a car, but imagine sitting in a wagon or sitting on a train. In America, people don't travel by train so much, but in England and Europe, it's very common people travel by train, intercity and even intercountry. So it doesn't cost you anything. We're not going to make you stop because we don't want to interrupt your journey, but it doesn't cost you anything. It doesn't delay you or inconvenience you to stand up.
Unless you're the wagon driver.
Yeah, but I'm saying, right, so should you stand up to say Tefilas Haderech? So that's how the Chaim wants to learn pshat in the Gemara that you should really stand up, and also in the Aruch HaShulchan he's talking about the Mesilas HaBarzel, the iron paths. That was what the Poskim referred to the train. So on the train he says, it's very easy to stand up, or if you're on a ship, on a cruise, it's easy to stand up, so you should say it's standing up. However, for example, the Alter Rebbe writes, we saw before the lashon of the Alter Rebbe, it doesn't seem to imply, seems to be talking more about going stationary from moving. It doesn't really seem to be talking about standing up. The Alter Rebbe doesn't seem to be so concerned with that. However, it's interesting to note that we have from the Chabad Rabbeim, we have this from the Rebbe Rashab, and also from the Rebbe himself. The only times that the Rebbe traveled out of the city that we have sort of recordings of what the Rebbe did were the two times in the summers in the 50s where the Rebbe went to visit upstate, to visit the camp, Gan Yisrael. And both the Rebbe Rashab and the Rebbe, it's reported that they pulled over at a gas station. Well, the Rebbe Rashab wasn't a gas station, but that they stopped. In the case of the Rebbe, they pulled over at a gas station, got out and washed his hands, and then said Tefilas Haderech standing up. So it seems like, even though certainly halachically there's no requirement for this, but the idea that the Rabbeim did say it standing up, and they even washed their hands before, which is an interesting thing. I didn't sort of see anything, obviously, what would be the specific need to wash your hands. But in general, I guess Tara and before you say any bracha, you're supposed to be
Even lichlach.
yeah. But anyway, they did stop and stand up. So there is such an idea to say it's standing up, although certainly, I think, practically speaking, if you're on a train, it's certainly an easy thing to do. If you're on a plane, usually, we'll see soon when the correct time to say Tefilas Haderech is. If you're on a plane, you're usually not able to stand up, certainly not at that time in the flight. And even if you can, standing up in a plane is off, even if you, for whatever reason, you're saying it later on in the flight, once the seatbelt signs are off, it's still usually standing up is not on a plane is not going to enhance your concentration. On the contrary, but if you're stopping in a gas station, then it's certainly a nice thing to do. Now,
By the way, Rav Sheshes is blind.
yes, Rav Sheshes was blind.
And
Okay,
even,
that's why he asked.
Gira, even though he's blind, it's still putting it on his eyes. And this remedy was helpful for him in some kind of way.
No, but the point is that's why he asked his assistant what Rav Chisda is doing, because he couldn't see what Rav Chisda was doing. Okay. Now, the Gemara says over there, when do you say Tefilas Haderech? Mishah shebahalach b'derech. Once you're traveling on the road, that's when you say it. And then the Gemara says, Ad kama, till when? Till how much? Amar Rav Yaakov, Amar Rav Chisda, ad parsa. You say it till a parsa. Now a parsa is a 8,000 amos, which is about 3.8 kilometers or just over 2 miles. Right? That's the distance of a parsa. Now, what does it mean that you say Tefilas Haderech ad parsa? So the Rishonim, we find 3 pirushim. The first commentary, the first interpretation is that of Rashi, which is the one that's the most difficult to understand what the logic behind Rashi is. But what Rashi says is that you should not say it after a parsa. In other words, you say Tefilas Haderech before you're a parsa into your journey. Once you're over this, again, let's call it approximately 2 miles into your journey, now you've missed the chance you don't say Tefilas Haderech anymore. That's one interpretation, and again, it doesn't. I can't say I looked high and low, but it seems difficult to understand why that would be the case. Why should you not say Tefilas Haderech if you've already gone more than a parsa? And indeed, that's the second interpretation is, in fact, that ideally you should say it within the first parsa, but if you didn't say it within the first parsa, you continue to say it as long as you're not within a parsa of the city of your destination. So as long as you're traveling, I don't know, from Chicago to Detroit, so ideally you say it within the first 2 miles outside of Chicago. If you didn't say it then, you say it any time along the way. This is actually how we paskin, yeah? But if you forgot to say it and you remember while you're within when you're already within 1 parsa, whatever it is, 2 and a bit miles of the city of your destination, then it's already too late. Then your journey is considered, so to speak, finished, and you no longer say Tefilas Haderech. There is another interpretation, which we also paskin lahalacha, and that is that you say Tefilas Haderech on a journey that is a parsa. If the distance between the 2 cities is less than a parsa, it's less than 2.2 miles, whatever exactly it is, so then you don't say Tefilas Haderech. So again, lahalacha l'maisa, we take out from this 3 things. Number 1, you say Tefilas Haderech on a journey the distance of which is a parsa. Number 2, ideally you say it within the first parsa after you leave your city, to be choshesh to shittas Rashi, that you have to say it then, or maybe even other Rishonim hold that that's pshat in the Gemara, that lechatchila you're supposed to say it then. But if you didn't say it then you say it anytime within your journey, as long as you're not within a parsa of the city of your destination. However, the poskim add that if your journey from one city to the next is less than a parsa, but it is a journey that is muchzak b'sakana, that it's known to be a dangerous trip, so then you do say it. So we're going to talk more practically speaking soon, but I just want to point out, when we talk about the city, we don't mean what we call today the city limits. Like right now in Chicago, across the street is Evanston, down there is Skokie, and over there is Lincolnwood. Halachically, that's all considered one city. A city in Halacha, we talk about Tchum Shabbos, how far you're allowed to travel on Shabbos outside the city. It's going to come up soon in the Rambam also for the 3 parak cycle. The halachic definition of the city is an inhabited area. So once you come to an area where there are no longer any houses, now you're outside the city. Yeah. Right? So in America, it's not certain, I don't know about rural America, but certainly, in Chicago or in the big city, it's not common that you should have 2 cities that are yes. So once you are 70 amos, which is about 100 feet or so, past the last house, now you're considered to be outside the city, right? So you don't usually have a gap of 200 feet in another city, right? So it's not. But if you think about places like in Israel, where often you have, if you go between Kfar Chabad and Tel Aviv, right? I mean, that's you don't need to, or even in Israel, you often have very sort of small patches of highway or of streets with no houses and no inhabitants, just fields or whatever it is, and then another city. So you could be going up and back in the same city, from one city to another, multiple times a day, which we're going to talk about that later. But I'm just saying the idea that you could have two cities which are separate cities, but it's less than a parsa difference in between them. Can happen in other countries, and I think that it could even be it's a derech sakana. There are certain places in Israel where the only way to get from A to B, even though it's a very short distance, is going through places which are dangerous. And certainly, if a person has to take that trip, he should say Tefilas Haderech. Okay. Now another discussion which comes up in the poskim is how to understand this idea of parasa, because we said a parasa is 8,000 amos, which is 3.85 kilometers to whatever it is, 2.2 something miles, right? Do we mean in distance, or do we mean that as a time frame, right? So back in the day, the way the common mode of travel was walking. So to walk a parasa takes 72 minutes. So are we saying that you should, when we talk about parsa, meaning you only say Tefilas Haderech if the distance from city A to B is a parsa, and ideally you should say it within the first parsa of your trip. But if you didn't, you could say it as long as you're not within the parsa of your destination. All these times we're using the word parsa. Do we mean parsa as in 2.2 miles, or do we mean parsa as in 72 minutes? Mm-hmm. Right. So this is a topic which the poskim discussed. Mainly, this became a topic of discussion. The poskim once travel by train became common, and Lamaisa, it seems like many poskim, including the Mishnah Berurah, say that we're talking about a parsa. We're talking about the distance traveled, not about the time frame. However, there are some poskim, I think most famously perhaps Rabbi Yosef, who talks about that Rabbi Yosef holds that we're talking here about that we follow the time frame of 72 minutes. Again, I believe that if Rabbi Yosef is your pesach, then that's your pesach. But I believe that the more common interpretation of the poskim is that we go by distance and we don't really concern ourselves so much with the time frame. Okay, there's other poskim talk about like what do you do if you go from A to B, where the sort of aerial distance is less than a parsa, but the only way to get there is in some long, up a mountain, down a mountain, and it's more than a parsa. I don't think we're going to get into that right now. Now, when are you supposed to say Tefilas Haderech? So the Gemara says, Emes Matzli. When do you say this prayer? Mishasham. The Gemara says, Mishasham Mahalach B'derech. Once you're going on the way. The Mechaber says, Hechzik b'derech. You're already, how do you say hechzik? You're on the way, right? So there's a number of different ways to understand this this halacha. Some poskim hold that even before you leave your house or before you leave your city, once you're going on this journey that is taking you out of the city, so now you're already on the journey. You've already packed your bags, you're about to leave your house, or you're already sitting in your car or in your wagon about to leave. So you're already on the trip, and you're on the trip. Your intention is that this trip is going to take you intercity, out of the city. So now you can say Tefilas Haderech. That's one approach. And indeed, the Chidah says that as soon as you leave the front door of your house, you stop outside your house, you say Tefilas Haderech. Now, it's interesting because in theory, it's a much more convenient time to say Tefilas Haderech. You're traveling, you're driving, and you pull over, you don't pull over, you get everybody to stop whatever they're doing. Like, it would be much more sort of in the spirit of Tefilas Haderech, I believe. Before you you get into the car, let's say, before we pull out, before we get distracted listening to our podcast and fighting with the kids and whatever you do, let's say Tefilas Haderech. But Lamaisa, Lemaisa, the poskim don't. The other poskim say no. The Shalah, the Magen Avraham, and the Alter Rebbe also says that you shouldn't say Tefilas Haderech until you've actually left the city. So the correct time frame to say Tefilas Haderech is after you've left the city, because then it's Hechzik Baderech. But ideally within the first parasha. So you're driving on the highway, so you leave Chicago, you're going, I don't know, to South Bend, yeah? You're going to Indiana. So once you see that, okay, you're outside the area of houses, you might still see a factory here and there, but there's already big gaps in between them. It's not the inhabited city area. Now you're outside the city, and then ideally within the first 2 miles of reaching that benchmark, that's the time to say Tefilas Haderech. And if it's possible to pull over and say it, then you should say it pulled over. If not, you say it while you're driving. If you have somebody else in the car, somebody else can say it, then you answer Amen if you find that more convenient. If you don't have somebody else in the car and you can't say it by heart, so then I would, and there's no safe place to pull over, I would say better wait until you have a gas station, even if it's more than a parasha, because that's only lechatchila with machmir to Rashi. But wait till you get to a gas station where you can pull over and say it, quote unquote, like you mentioned. Yes.
Yeah, one of the reasons why I think it's safe to Tefilas Haderech is for protection, right? Hashem's
Right.
protection. I think you're gonna, in a way, if you're going outside the city, you need more protection from the time you leave your house until you reach the edge of the city with all the traffic than once you get out of the city because there's no traffic.
Very good. So you're saying that l'chayra driving in the city is more dangerous than driving on the highway, right? Okay, very good. Thank you for bringing that up. And we're going to get to that. I just want to cover a few more little small topics first. Okay, flying. So somebody asked the Rogatchover. Now the Rogatchover is famous for having his tremendously deep and creative understanding of Torah and applying it to the most seemingly unrelated areas, and he gets it right away, right?
And his temper.
So somebody asked the Rogatchover. Now the Rogatchover lived. Do you want to pull up his dates? When did the Rogatchover pass away? I would guess that the Rogatchover passed away in, I don't know, if I had to guess, I would say in the 1910s.
No, 1936.
Oh, wow.
1858 to 1936.
Okay. So somebody asked the Rogatchover, and obviously this was new at the time, the Fiarach, what do you do if you're traveling on a plane? Does travel on a plane warrant Tefilas Haderech? So the Rogatchover didn't miss a beat, and he says that it's explicit in the Gemara that the Gemara says like this: if you encounter a nest of a bird on the derech, on the way. So the Gemara says, if you find a bird's nest in the sea, you still have to send away the mother bird. Why? Because we see that the pasuk refers to sea travel, refers to as derech. So, and it says in the Gemara, what about if you find the nest? Are you going to tell me that if you find the nest in the sky, you have to send away the mother bird because the Gemara, the pasuk says derech nesher b'shamayim, that the way of the vulture is in the heavens. So you see that the travel in the sky is referred to as a derech. So the Gemara says no, derech nesher ikri, travel in the heavens is for the way of the vultures is not considered the way, the derech, right? So says the Rogatchover, you see from here that if you're in the sky, that's not called a derech. This is a prayer for a derech, Tefilas Haderech. So obviously
unless you're a vulture.
So you don't say Tefilas Haderech maybe on a plane, because the plane used to be called, I think, the flying bird. No, the flying ship. No, okay, fine. Anyway. But there was the plane that was called the bird. There was, like how every ship has a name. So it used to be that every plane has a name. Now they have a registration or whatever. But there were planes that had the name with the word bird in the name. Anyway, whatever the case is. So it says the Rogatchover, no Tefilas Haderech for plane travel. However, so there's a letter published in Likutei Sichos, volume 12, which is a letter that the Rebbe wrote in. It doesn't say here the date, interestingly. But my recollection is that this is a letter that the Rebbe wrote in 1952. And it's about bench and goimel. Now, the whole sugya of bench and goimel and when you do and don't bench goimel is related to Tefilas Haderech, although I am specifically avoiding talking about that today. But at the end of that letter, the Rebbe quotes this idea from the Rogatchover, and the Rebbe says, I don't understand. The point of Tefilas Haderech is not whether or not technically it's a derech or not a derech. It's more about whether or not this is you're leaving the comfort or the stability of your home, of your town, of your city, and that poses some element of danger. And so what's the difference if you're going on a derech or you're doing it by other means? You're still leaving your house and you don't have the safety and the protection of your natural... Again, I'm paraphrasing what the Rebbe says here. This is my own interpretation here. If anybody wants to look it up, it's look at Sichos, volume 12, page 152. So therefore the Rebbe says, no, you definitely do say Tefilas Haderech even when you are going on a plane. And indeed, people entertain the Rogatchover, but for the most part, I believe the poskim do accept that travel by plane is no different than by train, bus, car, or whatever, and you do say Tefilas Haderech. Now, when are you supposed to say Tefilas Haderech when you go on a plane? Now, okay. Let's assume, there's going to be some cases, we're going to get to this in a moment, but let's assume the airport is in the city, which I think that nowadays, this is in the letter the Rebbe says otherwise, but I think that nowadays the reality is that for the most part, the airports are within the halachic city, right? Even here in Chicago, you go to O'Hare, you go to Midway, you're not leaving the city on the way to O'Hare or Midway. I'm pretty sure the same is true in London and in New York and in Tel Aviv, in all the cities that I've flied in and out of with any frequency. You're not leaving the city necessarily on the way to the airport. And so that being the case, the Rishonim say that, so you're supposed to, so for example, the Mishnah Halacha says, and I believe this is the prevalent custom, he says, look, you're supposed to say it within the first parsa of leaving the city. When do you leave the city when you're on a plane? So the moment you touch off ground, right? Is that the word, touch off?
Take off.
Well, takes off.
Down is take off.
Yeah, take off. The moment the wheels leave the ground, right? You're within a split second after that, you're now you're out of the city, right? You're above the houses. It's not right. So he says. Now again, ideally, you're supposed to say Tefilas Haderech within the first parsa of you leaving the city. So at least, you can't say that. You can't say the whole Tefilas Haderech by the time the plane takes 2 seconds. But at least you should start right away. I see the Be'er Moshe the Debretzina. He says that you could, while you're already on the runway, sort of going towards takeoff, you're also already leaving the city, and that's already, you could start saying Tefilas Haderech then. I think that also, practically speaking, it depends on each airport and each runway. Sometimes, the plane taxis for forever, and you go these runways and even though the airport itself is not way out of the city, by the time the plane is taking off, you're already more than the distance of 70 amas from the last house, or even from the airport for sure, but even, you're not in an inhabited area necessarily. Again, it depends on each airport.
Well, doesn't it go back to the question you already raised, which is, why don't we do it right when, it would be masudar to do it before you leave your parking
so we said, because there's the Al Paskim who say that you're supposed to say it after you're already on the way, but so Lamaisa, the minhag is in line with these poskim that you say it either while you're on the runway, you're already starting to go towards takeoff, or after liftoff. I think that's the word they use. After liftoff from the ground, but then you should say it ideally right away. Now, if you said it too early, it's fine, because, like we said before, the Meikadin, certainly there are poskim who say you could say it while you're still in the city, and that's fine. I should add another thing, that, by the way, that all the poskim agree that if you have a trip that takes multiple days, that on the next day of the trip you could say it for example, if you're doing a road trip, so the first day of your trip, you say Tefilas Haderech after you leave your city, right? Then you're taking a hotel, you're staying overnight, and then you continue in your trip. The next morning you could say Tefilas Haderech in your hotel room. Not everybody agrees, because you're already on the trip, although we'll see soon about exactly when you say Tefilas Haderech on a trip that takes multiple days. But just go back to the planes for a moment. So Lamaisa, again, to summarize, the poskim basically don't adopt the Rogatchover. They say that you do say Tefilas Haderech on a plane, and ideally the correct time to say it is, right by takeoff, if you can. But again, if you didn't, so long as if you're already landing, then maybe not. But basically, any time through the flight that you remember, you could say Tefilas Haderech. So if you ever if you're delayed and you fall asleep and then you wake up and you're already mid-flight, so you say Tefilas Haderech whenever you remember. Okay, now moving on to Yosef. You wanted to say something? No.
Yeah, it's fine.
No. Okay, now moving on to a journey that takes a number of days. Now here there's something which I'm a little bit embarrassed even to say it. But I just realized this in preparing this class. But it should have been obvious maybe, but it wasn't obvious to me, and maybe it's not obvious to others. So we'll go through this. The Kolbei writes, Adam ha'hil chutz le'ir, ein tzorich l'spal tefila zu, ki im pam achas b'tchilas ha'yom, afilu minuch be'im b'em tzadech shah achas. K'sheyitzu misham, ein tzorich l'spal tefila tzadech pam acheres, dati l'olam be'ir, v'ach kach nimlach v'yotzim meno, then you do say tefila tzadech. Okay, so basically what's he saying? He's saying that if you travel, you're going on your trip, and then in the middle of your travel, you come into another city. And you stay in that city for a little bit, and then you continue, right? So you stop off. You're driving to Pittsburgh. You stop in Cleveland for lunch, and then you go on to Pittsburgh, right, or the other way around, whatever it is. Yeah. So he says then you don't continue saying Tefilas Haderech. You say it once. You said it in the beginning of the day. The fact that you came into a city and left the city, you still only say it one time for the whole day. However, the poskim say that's all if it's on the same day. But if you go for another day, if you like I said before, you go on a road trip, you stay overnight. So then each day warrants its own Tefilas Haderech. And this is indeed the way the Taz paskins, and the Taz paskins that you say Tefilas Haderech every day of your trip. However, there's another opinion based on the Radvaz, and the way Reb Chaim Noah explains this in his Sefer, he says no, you say Tefilas Haderech once for your whole trip. And even if your trip takes many days and many weeks, your bracha is you should get me l'mchoyis cheftzenu to my destination l'chaim u'l'simcha l'shalom, right? So it doesn't matter if it takes a day, 2 days, a week, a month. It's all one trip. You said Tefilas Haderech once for the whole trip. And even if Reb Chaim Noah adds in his footnote over there, he says, even if usually if you have something that you say a bracha on and then it stops, you say it again, right? So, for example, if there's thunder and lightning and then the storm clears and then the next day there's another storm, you say it again, right? So here, there's certainly, he says, what if there's a Shabbos in between? So you certainly disrupted your travels, right? Doesn't matter. It's one trip. You say it for the whole thing. And therefore, based on this Shitta, the Pri Chodesh paskins that you should only say it once every day, once at the beginning of your trip, and then for the rest of the days of your trip, you say it without Shema Malchus, which means you say the regular text, you say Hashem's name in the beginning. Also, I believe Hashem Elokeinu, but at the end, instead of saying Baruch Atah Hashem Shemei Tefillah, you say Baruch Atah Shemei Tefillah. You skip the word Hashem, so that it shouldn't be a problem of a bracha levatala. Yes, that way you avoid the bracha levatala. Now, how do we paskin? So in Shulchan Aruch, the Alter Rebbe paskins like the Taz, that you say it once a day, and therefore, according to that, you say it with Shema Malchus once a day. And according to that, if you, for example, are so you're taking your road trip, like I said before. So then, before you leave, the first day you say it after you've left the city, but in the rest of the days of your trip, you could say it in your hotel room or whatever it is before you leave on your trip. That's fine. However,
because you're already that amount of distance away from your home.
Because you're already you're already hechzik baderech, right? Now, however, in the Siddur, the Alter Rebbe writes, the rest of the days that you're on your trip until you come home. You should say it every morning, and even in your hotel. You should not finish Baruch Atah Hashem Shemei Tefillah. You should avoid the Baruch Atah. And this is clear the way the Tzemach Tzedek, Reb Chaim Noah, the Sharakol, all those who talk about the Alter Rebbe's ruling in the Siddur, they all say that L'maisa we're choishish to the shit of the Pri Chadash, that you and the Radvaz, that you don't say it, that you only say it once per trip. Now, in addition to this, there's something that this wasn't new to me. I always knew this, was that the Hanhog of the Rebbe Rashab, and the Rebbe's mentioned this a number of times, that while you're on a trip, you say Tefilas Haderech every day without Shema Malchus. Now, so let me summarize, practically speaking, all of this, and I'll explain to you what was new to me just now as I figured this out now. Lahalacha, the way it's in Shulchan Aruch and most of the poskim, the Taz, etc., the Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch is when you're traveling on a trip for multiple days, you say it every day of your trip. The first day you say it after you leave town. In the continuation of your trip, you could say it even in your hotel room. Now, based on this, by the way, I was always disturbed that if you're traveling from west to east, often you'll have a night and a new day while you're on the plane, right? So the Chayra, according to this, when it's the next day in the plane, you have to say Tefilas Haderech again. Although you could say that the idea is that usually the poskim talking here about another day, each day say Tefilas Haderech again, is because the assumption is that there was a time in the night that you stopped your trip and you went to your hotel and now you're continuing it. But if you're traveling continuously through the night, then you don't need to say Tefilas Haderech again. So I think that practically speaking, nobody does that. I've never seen anybody on the plane, it's the morning now on the plane, say Tefilas Haderech again. It's one trip, you're traveling through the night, you don't say Tefilas Haderech again. That's all if you're not following the Alter Rebbe's Siddur ruling. But for Chassidic Chabad who follow the ruling of Alter Rebbe's Siddur, even if you're going on a road trip for many days and you're traveling, you say Tefilas Haderech only once with Shema Malchus, and all the subsequent days you say it without Shema Malchus. Now, then there is the Hanhaga of the Rebbe Rashab. The Hanhaga, the Chiddush of the Rebbe Rashab, which the way I always understood it, and I still think this is correct, is that even if you're not traveling, because you're still on your journey, you say Tefilas Haderech without Shema Malchus. So, for example, you go out of town, you go to Florida for Yom Tov, yeah? You go to visit your parents for Yom Tov. So, there's the day that you travel to Florida, the day that you travel to whatever your destination, or let's say it's even 2 or 3 days, fine. Now you get there. For the next week, I'm not traveling, I'm staying in my parents' house. Nevertheless, each of those days, while you're in your quote-unquote destination, you're not at home, and therefore during those days you also say Tefilas. This was the Chiddush of the Rebbe Rashab, that during those days you also say Tefilas Haderech b'Shema Malchus. I always had the question myself, what about, do you even say it on Shabbos and Yom Tov according to Rebbe Rashab's minhag? Which, and I actually one time asked Rabbi Eli Landau, who was a son of Rabbi Yankel Landau, who was the Rav in the Rebbe Rashab, he knew these things. Unfortunately, I don't remember what he answered me. Lamaisa, I do not say it.
That you asked him?
I remember that I asked him. I don't remember what he answered me. But Lamaisa, I personally do not say it on Shabbos and Yom Tov. I can say I always remember to say it when I'm traveling. But when I'm out of town, ideally, if I remember, I say it every day without Shema Malchus. Adkan, there's nothing new to me. Everything I've said until now, I knew. The Chiddush to me, which I just realized as I was going through this, that according to the Alter Rebbe and the Siddur, it's only once per journey. So even on your way back home, you also don't say Tefilas Haderech b'Shema Malchus, right? If I'm going for a week to London, or you're going for a week to Cleveland, right? So on the first day, you say it b'Shema Malchus, right? Then you're there for a week. During those days, if it's not Shabbos and Yom Tov, you say it without Shema Malchus. Now you're flying back. You still don't say it with Shema Malchus, because it's one tefillah for the whole journey. And ad shuvah lebeso, until you come back to your own home, you're still on that same journey, which is included in the original bracha of Tefilas Haderech. So that was the chiddush to me today, and I hope I'm right, based on what I could see here from the Lashon of the Alter Rebbe and Reb Chaim Noah and the Sharakol. That's what it seems to me, that until you come home, you don't say Tefilas Haderech more than once b'Shema Malchus. This is not something I've ever done. I always, when I went, I go to England, on the flight on the way back, I say Tefilas Haderech. But it seems like, according to this, I should be saying it on the flight on the way back without Shema Malchus. Yes?
That raises the question then. There's the parenthetical word.
V'sachas Yireinu L'Shalom, yeah, very good. So the V'sachas Yireinu L'Shalom is in the, as you called it, very good, the parenthetical word is, it says that if you're coming back home on the same day, you say V'sachas Yireinu L'Shalom. Now, so you're saying, based on this, if you tefillah once for the whole journey, for the whole week, 2 month long travel, includes the whole trip until you come
Should be
home,
only the same
so you
day.
should say v'sach zirein l'shalom in your original thing. That's a good ha'ara, and it's a good ha'ara. L'maisa, I don't think that changes anything, because first of all, you are going to say it continue to say it every day without Shema Malchus, so you have that element of it. So you are going to say it on your journey back home without Shema Malchus. Whether or not you say V'sach Hazirenu L'Shalim doesn't disqualify. In other words, like this: let's say you're traveling to Florida today, and you're coming back on the same day, and you don't say V'sach Hazirenu L'Shalim, right? Whatever, you forgot to say it. Yeah, you're still not going to say Tefilas Haderech again for your journey back. V'sach Hazirenu L'Shalim. Ideally, you're supposed to say it if you're coming back on the same day. You're supposed to say it, but we don't need to get down to those specifics. We just say in general that this, even without the word Zachazreinu L'Shalim, Tefilas Haderech is a tefillah for the journey, and you never say it, according to all opinions, you never say it more than once a day, unless you change your mind. If you thought you reached your destination, then you change your mind to continue your travels, then you would say it again. So, a point taken that l'chayra, according to the Alter Rebbe's Mahalach, that you're only going to say it once with Shema Malchus, then you should say V'sachazreinu L'Shalim, even if you're planning to come back in a week or 2 weeks. Lamais, good point. I don't have a good answer for you. I don't think that's what we do.
So you're saying I shouldn't say, if I'm going to hold by this, I still shouldn't only say V'sach Hazirenu if I'm coming back the same day.
That's what I think. Yes.
All right.
Now,
This is not the logic is very bothersome for me.
go on.
I can understand if you're like in a state of travel. Like, okay, so I'm going and I'm traveling to California. I'm sleeping overnight at a hotel as I'm traveling, or I'm staying in a caravan or something. So then every single day I'm saying Tefilas Haderech, and then finally I get there. Okay, and then at some point, let's say I'm just stopping in California just for the day, and then I'm turning right back. So then this all makes sense. But if I'm like traveling to California and I'm spending 2 weeks in California. When I'm heading back from California, it's like to me like a new traveling.
That was always what I did as well.
But how do you know?
Does it depend on, there's probably some unique factors. I mean, if you really want to get into the nitty gritty, first of all, where's your family? That's likely to be considered your home. If you're talking about, that kind of a thing.
But
Also,
when I go to
what
work-
if you're a person who travels all the time and you have makam kavua that you stay in at that place? Like some people have like a rental property in the place, right?
Yeah.
So is that the end of your trip in that case?
Yeah. That should be even more obvious in such a case. But I don't know.
I'm just looking here in the notes of Rabbi Chaim Noah. It's in Ksei Shulchan and Badi Shulchan in Siman Samach Zayin, number 67.
I'm muchzak
One
b'derech
sec,
when
one
I'm
second.
staying overnight. When I'm staying for 2 weeks somewhere, I'm still traveling.
Especially if you're staying because of your parents'
לפי דעתי ניחא דשאני הכה שעצם נוסח התפילה כבר כולל בסייחי בקושי או תפילה על כל הדרך שילך עד שובי לביסוי.
Yeah, but again,
And then, wait a second, he brings it clearly from the Radvaz. Remember I mentioned before about if it becomes light in the middle of the plane ride? He brings clearly from the Radvaz that if you don't stop at night, then you don't say it again the next day, right? So that's clear that you don't say it again. Yeah? Again, I don't think I hear that. I acknowledge that the way you're saying it is the more pashto way, but I don't. It doesn't sound sort of illogical for me that the derech and the sakana. I want to have a few more minutes to talk about what the sakana is, especially how we understand that nowadays. But the idea is that somehow leaving the stability and leaving the stability of your home and your town poses some sort of sakana. So until you come back to your home, that is one event, and you've said your tefillah for that event. Okay, now. Okay, I just want to point out there is another question, a small question of Tefilas Haderech about Samach L'Chavito. Usually a bracha that ends with the Baruch Atah Hashem but doesn't start with the Baruch Atah Hashem is only, we've discussed this a number of times, is only if it comes after another bracha. Another 5 minutes, hopefully I'll be addressed to your question, Avram, yeah?
Okay.
So Lemaisa Tefilas Haderech seems to be an exception to that rule because it finishes with Baruch Atah Hashem Shemei Tefillah. It doesn't start with the Baruch Atah Hashem. The poskim discuss why. Some poskim bring that ideally you should say you make another bracha. You go to the bathroom and you say Asher Yotzar, or you eat something or whatever it is to say another bracha before Tefilas Haderech. Lemaisa. There are those who, yes, so certainly that's something the poskim bring as an ideal. In Chabad, it seems like it's not such a thing, and specifically, the story is brought up with the Rabbi when he went on those trips to the Catskills that people offered him something to eat or whatever to him. The Rabbi said, no, we don't need to do that. So even though the Rabbi did it with all the chumras of stopping and standing up and washing his hand, the Rabbi didn't seem to be concerned with this idea of saying Tefilas Haderech.
Bracha in the beginning.
Okay, so again, it's certainly a legitimate chumrah, but for those who follow the Chabad way, you have the Ma'aser Rav that we don't do it. Okay, now here we come to the thing which I was expecting to be attacked by all our dear rationalists over here. But you guys severely disappointed me. Yes, all of you who are shaking your heads, you the guys I'm referring to.
All on this side of the table?
No.
There's other rationalists in this house?
Wannabes.
Just a nudnik. You're the rationalist. I give a hard time. Stop.
Okay.
I'm an irrational rationalist.
So the question over here is, what's the text of Tefilas Haderech? What are you asking for? It says, save us from chayis rois baderech, from wild animals, melistim, from bandits, right? What are we talking about? You go on a plane, you go on a train, there's no bandits, there's no wild animals. What's the sakana? What are you talking about? Why are you saying Tefilas Haderech? The whole thing seems to be an archaic, is that the word? Which has no relevance nowadays and should be.
With a klapper ravos, I say minagav v'seinu bi'adenu, minagav v'seinu bi'adenu.
Okay. So this is a question which basically this question comes up in the poskim. Basically, this question becomes popular in the poskim from around the time when the Mesilos HaBarzal, when the trains became prevalent, and they're like, hold on, should we still be saying Tefilas Haderech? And you see some ambivalence. So, for example, just to quote from one example, you have the Ketzos HaShulchan, Reb Chaim Noah, who he says, you go on the way, it's not a derech shamim in the middle anymore, and do you say it, do you not say it? He finishes off with the Tzarech Yiyah, and he says on the one, however, it seems that this is takana, we don't mess with the takana of Chazal. That when you go on outside, there's sort of this legal parameters. You leave your city, okay, fine. He says, Musubkani, I'm not sure if you travel on a way where there's other people, there's cars, there's police, you're not just in the wilderness. Do you still have to say Tefilas Haderech? Now, I want to quote a really, really interesting, because here, in other words, conceptual, I'll get back to that in a moment, right? However, other poskim say, no, in the Mukhe Rechaim, that's the Munkatcher, he says, no, Hevel Yiftzah Pihem, if for those who say you don't say Tefilas Haderech, even if you do, there's always danger when you leave the city. Okay, so basically, that seems to be these two approaches. Once upon a time, traveling was dangerous. Nowadays, it's not dangerous, so we don't say Tefilas Haderech anymore. And others say
no. In other words, you only say it when it's dangerous.
Okay, yeah, basically. Others say that no, and then we have to talk about what does danger mean. Others say, sort of, we're just getting technical. There's a takana of Chazal. You leave the city limits. You say a bracha Tefilas Haderech. That's what you say. Those seem to be more or less the two approaches. Now, l'chayra, you could say, look, traveling is not dangerous nowadays. No Tefilas Haderech. There's also another way to say it. There is danger in travel. There's accidents. There's all sorts of things that can happen in travel. Now, you might make the argument, like Bill said, yes, it's true that there's some danger in travel, but it's much more dangerous to drive in the city than it is to drive on the highway. So on that, you could say that at the end of the day, look, you can't create a new takanas chazal. Driving on the highway has some element of danger to it, and for that we have a takana, or even going on a train, once in a while you see in the news, there's chas v'shalom, the train gets derailed, whatever it is, right? These things happen once in a while. So there is some element of danger. Narvas. So you should say Tefilas Haderech because it's the Takana of Chazal. Are you saying there's other things that you're doing, that you're traveling in the city that is even more dangerous? Good, but for that there's no Takana of Chazal. So,
if there's a takana chazal, you don't even have to come to that there's any danger.
but that's the question. Do you
If we
really
got- if,
divorce?
let's say we figured out a way to make trains that there was 100%, like it will never derail. It never, like let's say you get like you
So,
know,
but I'm not
the
sure.
technology
Really,
gets to the
really,
point where
really, is the Kana Chazal completely supposed to be taken? In other words, is it supposed to be completely technical? You leave the city limits, so there's a tefillah to say, or is there some element of sakana? And by the way, if you think even about the text of the bracha, so we say listim chayesrois baderech, which I mean, unless you. Truth is, you have Miracle on the Hudson, right? There was a bird strike. Maybe that's Chayes Rois Baderech. Or you have sometimes a deer in the highway. But I think that more or less, when I say Tefilas Haderech, when I talk about the bandits, I'm more thinking, okay, that's the text that we say. But what I do think is relevant is you say, Mikol Mine Pironias Amisrakshas Lois Loilam, all sorts of dangerous things that could happen. That's when I think about, save me, I should have a safe trip, right? So it could be that it's sort of just generic. One second.
there's times
One
where it's
second.
virtually like when you're on a plane. Okay, let's say we're talking about trains or cars. Those have let's say a certain statistical potential of risk. Planes are like almost like statistically like completely
Okay, there you
unheard
go.
of to have any kind
Right.
of. So
Either way,
you have
One
you're
second,
traveling
one
on a
second.
plane.
Ari.
The place you're going, it might be the most dangerous. Once
Okay.
you get off the plane is when you're
Okay,
in
Ari,
danger.
so people are rushing to leave, and we're getting the hour mark. I want to. I want to have this conversation. I just want to finish off with a couple of points and quote something from the Rebbe. I think that look, life is by definition full of risks, and often, statistically speaking, flying is the most safe, certainly safer than driving statistically, right? However, in all areas of life, in halacha we don't only take into account statistics. We also talk about doshu barabim. In other words, there's certain things which may be more dangerous, but because it's doshu barabim, because everyone does it, we say, okay, that's fine. But you're doing something else, which statistically is less dangerous. But because it doesn't have this doshu barabim that everybody does it all the time, we still consider it a sakana, something that's dangerous that you should avoid. Now, here we're not talking about the same parameters exactly, because we're not saying that it's dangerous and therefore you shouldn't travel. The question is it dangerous enough that it warrants Tefilas Haderech? And here is something which I think I see this point in the Rabbi's letter, and I think that this is the sort of definitive, at least for me, this is again, I struggle where to draw the line, but I think this is somewhat of a thing. The Rebbe writes over here that usually the airport is outside of the city. Now, again, I said before, I don't think that's the case anymore today. Probably that was more true in the 50s. The Rebbe says like this, usually the airport is outside the city, but if you were just going to the airport and going back home, you wouldn't say Tefilas Haderech because that's a usual thing. That's a common thing. But now that you're going to the airport and from the airport you're going on the plane, so even if you hold the Rogatshava that the plane is not a derech, so you say Tefilas Haderech on the way to the airport. Now, what am I taking from here? The Rebbe is saying that it's not just about, and I think the Rebbe is not the only one who says this. Poskim say this. It's not just about look on your map. Did you go X amount of feet away from the last house? I think. What do you feel like you went on a trip, or did you feel like you just, people? There are people who commute, for example, especially in Israel. People commute in Israel, what's considered outside the city. People go from Yerushalayim to Beit Shemesh 3 times a day, right? It doesn't even occur to them that they're traveling out of the city. That's not how you think of it. You go to Tferia, to Tzfas, whatever it is, right? So that feeling of I'm going on a trip now, or I'm just going about my day, right? I don't feel any different. When I go across the street to Evanston, as I do when I go, I don't know, maybe I do, but for some people, for example, and here's coming to you, you go every week, you go to Milwaukee, wherever you go, whatever it is. I don't know what you're, right? So there's room to say that, okay, it's something that you do on such a routine basis. There are people who fly a few times a week, right? It's something you do on such a routine basis. Maybe there's room to say that that's already something that you do so routinely, you can't say that's derech and sakana. So again, I can't tell you where to draw the line. I will say, look, if you're in doubt, if you're not sure that this is considered a derech, then say it without shema malchus, or be yotze from somebody else. But so I don't know exactly where to draw the line, and I think the only way to understand it is, and again, most people, there's exceptions to this, most people feel like they're going on a trip more if they fly from Chicago to Detroit than if they drive from Chicago to Pittsburgh, right? Because, you're driving, fine, I drove, flying for most people, maybe some people even still have a little bit of a fear of flying or turbulence, even if they know the statistics that it's more safe. Some people still have a little bit of a, they get scared when they're flying. It's not a logical fear. So I don't know exactly where to draw the line and how to dot all the I's and cross all the T's. But it does seem that from the Rebbe's letter and from a number of poskim, that your personal attitude to what you're doing now is this: I'm just commuting to work like I do every day, or I'm going on a trip. That does play some sort of role in whether or not you say Tefilas Haderech b'Shem u'Malchus. Obviously, just the fact that it's out of the ordinary doesn't inherently make it dangerous, but that's another factor. I want to say, though, there's one svara which I really, really enjoyed from Taimani Paisek by the name, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, Ritzabi Reish Tzadik Aleph Beis Yud, I think is how he spells it. He's a Taimani Paisek in Bnei Brak. You see his name here and there, he comes up with interesting things. He has Truvas called Elis Yitzchak, and he's writing this about Ben Shin Goimel, not about Tefilas Haderech. I'm not getting into Goimel now, the Sfard and Ben Shin Goimel, even just from traveling into city. But he says like this, he says, if you're traveling, what do we say? What's the definition of Tefilas Haderech? You're leaving the city. How do you leave the city? Yeah, the last house. You go 70 amos past the last house, you've left the city. If you're driving on the highway and there's cars all over the places, so you've never really left the city because you're always surrounded by houses. They're moving houses. So what? You haven't really left the city. Yeah, his words are, I feel even in a long trip, the highways, the streets are full of traveling cars. It's like you haven't actually left the inhabited area. So that's
seeing people everywhere.
Right. There's not just people, there's even a car has a din of a house. So it's moving, so what? So what I like about this is that he's sort of, I think everybody to some extent has some sort of like, okay, this tefillah to some extent or another doesn't really make sense anymore, but we sort of stuck. There's this takana of Chazal, that's what you're supposed to do, whatever. And we struggle with that. And here he's kind of giving you sort of technical halachic svara not to say Tefilas Haderech, and then it would depend. You're driving to Detroit during the day where it's full of cars, or you're driving to upstate in the middle of the night where you might be the only car for 2 miles. So again, I am acknowledging that I'm leaving it somewhat open-ended, and I think that it does, in large part, depend on your personal feeling and experience of what you're doing now. Are you going on a trip, or are you just commuting to work like you always do?
Let me just leave it on one important point, though.
Thank you.
I feel like the main thing that's been missed in this discussion is that this is similar to, there's certain other things, I don't know if I can think of them right now, but we're missing the point. This is not like, oh, it's an obligation, do I do it, do I not do it? It's the opportunity to do a mitzvah, Zeh Bracha. That's the perspective from my perspective. Do you have the opportunity to do this mitzvah, or do you not?
100%.
And if they're saying that, listen, you could, so what? Some things are archaic. Some things are not.
Yes, that's true. And
so
there's
what?
many things.
You don't do the mitzvah anymore?
100%. And there's many
But if you
takanas
have
and
a
gzeres
svara.
that we do. But on the counter argument to that is that you're saying something to Hashem that's meaningless to you. You're talking about Hashem saving you from bandits, and you're like, what are you talking about? I've never seen a bandit.
It's meaning that I think you said it in the answer. It's meaningless to you because you're making it meaningless. But it's not meaningless. There's plenty in there that's meaningful.
Okay, some of it is meaningful.
So there's certain things in the Shemona Esrei that are not so as meaningful as other things in the Shemona Esrei. Do I not say them anymore? No. So to me, that's a silly argument.
But wait, if you're talking about danger, though, and there's clearly like the probability of danger.
You see that
minimal.
You see that in the
from a
poskim.
subjective perspective that what I'm doing is I'm just. So then there's good reason not to misuse Hashem's name, not to.
For example, let me give you an example. Right. For example, let me read you a quote from a Pesach Hadvir, who's a Sfadi Pesach. I think he learned I think he was in Turkey or something. He's talking about the trains, and he says, "Look, at the end of the day, you're going by train, so you don't have a sakana. But at the end of the day, this is a journey that a lot of people go by foot, and when you go by foot, there is a danger. So even you happen to be going by train, so we still consider the derech sakana. So you see, so what do you do nowadays when nobody's making that trip by foot anymore? So you could see even here he's trying to maintain, and you see the Rebbe's answer to this guy in 91 where it was already thing, and he's going to Montreal. But there is an agenda on the one hand that, we have all these brachas, we've spoken in the past about the challenges with Shechayonu and other things, and all these brachas which is like difficult to keep up nowadays. And we have this agenda to sort of keep the brachas alive, and at the same time, okay, this is derech, this is sakana. There has to sort of be some justification, even if it's not a smooth justification, but at least some justification.
That's where you're coming down with your personal thing, saying it's your personal thing. Do you feel there's a sakana? Are you
There's
concerned?
clearly a subjective quality here.
Do you feel a sakana, or at least do you feel that you're going on a journey, right? Some people think about going to Milwaukee the way I feel about going to Skokie. right? Now, I've never been to Milwaukee. I don't know if I have, whatever. I mean, so for me, going to Milwaukee, I feel like I'm going on a trip, right? So that could play a role, and I think that there's it's.
She's saying halach plays a role.
Again, I think the Paskim say so, and you see clearly in the Rebbe's letter that he says that you don't say Tefilas Haderech and you wait to the airport if you're not going on the plane. Why? Because you always go to the airport. You always travel that close. So Does that somewhat?
That's beautiful. I'm just gonna be late.
The airplanes, the 737s and the 747s from Boeing were made around the 60s and the 70s are still in service. They don't make any more of those airplanes. They just keep repairing them and servicing them and inspecting them. So, I mean, pretty soon you're going to be flying on 100-year-old airplanes and you not even realize that because they still use them, the same airplane. So, I mean, I'm going to be saying
You're
prayers.
starting to question the
I'm going to be
safety.
saying prayers before I get on a 747. Yeah.
Look,
To me, the way I work.
if you want to say, if you want to,
statistics, probability.
okay, well, you're very into.
I'm right now going into the plane, right? That right now at this moment, that it's going to reach that 100-year point, and I'm going to be the one that's going to die. I think it's going to be a few others before it gets to me, and then I'll be like, okay, well,
safety in numbers.
the parameters have
Safety in
changed.
numbers.
If you really want to get technical about statistics, there may be, and again, I haven't done the research, but there may be an argument to be made that the moment of takeoff is statistically more dangerous than, certainly more dangerous than the rest of the flight, statistically, but it may be more dangerous than car travel or these certain types of car travel.
Airplane collision in history was on a small island. I can't remember the name of the island, but it was, all these planes were taken off like they were like 787s, taken off from this tiny little, Catalina Island or whatever, and one of them was taken off, and the other one was landing.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody died.
Yeah, of course. But very rare. Those kinds of things are very rare. I know when you get to the part of the Chayos Rose, so you're in a plane, you're like, what? There's going to be like a.
But then you think of the Hudson. You think of the Hudson miracle on the Hudson, right? The
That's
bird
exactly what I was
strikes,
thinking. Yes.
right? And you have deers on
You're
the.
like, but Chayos Rose, they're Rose.
And even if you really want to get to
a
this-
lion eating you and a bird getting into your into the engine, they're equally raw. Like, and maybe the lion doesn't have bad intentions; he's just hungry.
I mean, some of those flight attendants are nasty. They could be listening.
Meow.